Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to I Hate Rock Music. And this video is going to be about a band called Fuse. And of course, a lot of people kind of know about them now because Tom Peterson and Rick Nielsen of Cheap Trick were originally in this band. And so that's given it a little more visibility. I ran across it again in the cutout bins in about 1975 or so, and it has a stick of dynamite on the cover, and pretty much looked like it was going to be a hard rock album, and one that I'd never heard of, and it was on Epic, so I knew that it had to be reasonably good to get Epic interested. A lot of these major labels, even though they ended up a lot of times with second tier bands, they were definitely looking for some quality, and definitely a mixed bag with Fuse. Fuse was a combination of two previous bands, the Grim Reapers and Toast and Jam, and the lineup ended up being Rick Nielsen on guitar and keyboards, Joe Sundberg on vocals, Tom Peterson on bass, Craig Myers on guitar, and Chip Greenman on drums. And when I first got the record, I was a little nonplussed. It's definitely very keyboard heavy, and was really surprised to ultimately find out that Rick Nielsen was the keyboard player to it on it as well. So the heavy-handed keyboard work on the album is Rick Nielsen. So obviously they had two guitars, and then Rick Nielsen added all the keyboards as well. And kind of a sludgy record in a way. And for somebody like Rick Nielsen and Tom Peterson, who ended up writing all these incredibly memorable and melodic tunes for Cheap Trick, it's pretty amazing how sludgy and unfocused a lot of this Fuse album is. And they certainly disavow it, and I'm not surprised because it doesn't bear any relation to the work that Rick Nielsen and Tom Peterson did with Cheap Trick. And there's some, and they were out of Rockford as well. And of course, there's all kinds of connections between Fuse, Cheap Trick, and later versions of the Nas. And so Tom Mooney ended up playing with various members of these groups, and Bunny Carlos ended up being involved in that circle eventually too. And so, of course, Bunny Carlos and Tom Peterson, Rick Nielsen all met up in this stew of the Fuse, the Nas, and then an early incarnation of Cheap Trick called Sick Man of Europe. So, and then there's also found out later too. There's actually a non-LP Fuse single. One side is called Hound Dog, and the other side is Cruisin' for Burgers. And Cruisin' for Burgers is pretty focused and a lot more like what Rick Nielsen ended up doing with Cheap Trick. So it's definitely worth getting the single. Much better than generally what's on the album. And surprising, they put a lot of time into it. Fuse was around from 1967 to 1973, so cool to see that Rick and Tom were both playing music back as early as 1967, long before Cheap Trick. But they got signed to Epic in 1968, immediately rushed into Columbia Studios, produced by Jack Mills, who didn't do that great a job on it. And even though the album was recorded in 1978, it didn't get released. I mean, even though the album was recorded in 1968, it didn't get released until 1970, but it doesn't really matter when the album was released because it's just um, pretty average a record. I'm only talking about it because it's an interesting piece of work, and it's interesting to hear pre-Cheap Trick work by Rick Nelson and Tom Peterson. And interesting too that they maintained that Epic connection because Fuse was signed to Epic, and then of course Cheap Trick ended up getting signed to Epic uh, in 1976. So Fuse stayed together from 1969 1973, and they did a European tour in 1973. And Rick Nielsen talks a lot about hooking up with different people in Europe at the time. And when they got back from Europe in 1973, that's when they formed uh, Cheap Trick, an early version of Cheap Trick, and had various names before they settled on Cheap Trick. So for Cheap Trick fans, it's probably nice to have. For people that really got to collect, obscure high energy bands from the early '70s, Fuse is worth having in your collection. But it's got some good moments on it. They're obviously a pretty solid band. Probably some of the better players that were around in Rockford at that point in time. But unfortunately, Rick Nielsen's guitar work is there, and it's good, but it's kind of buried under a lot of keyboards. And as I mentioned right off the bat, it's really interesting that Rick Nielsen, such an all-time killer guitar player, ended up doing this record with so much keyboard work on it. And his keyboard work is fine, but it just kind of adds a lot of sludge to the record. And really unfortunate that Rick Nielsen didn't just stick to guitar on this record. And thinking about Rick, I'm really surprised that he did that, because otherwise they would have been a two guitar, bass, drums, and vocals band, and I think the record would have been a lot more successful and a lot more listenable if it just had two guitars on it. And in fact, when I listen to it and I hear all those keyboards, thinking of the same record with guitars all over it, and taking out the keyboards would have been a huge plus. I'm sure the record would be much, much better. But for those that are curious about it, it's worth checking out. As usual, I'll post it below, and I'll post the single below as well. Check them out. I rarely do reviews on this channel of records that I don't think are that good. I've done a couple. The Horse album out of the UK in 1969, I think, is a mixed bag. It's got some good stuff on it. And the Fuse record is another one of those, but I felt like I should talk about it because it is a interesting piece of work with people that went on to do incredible work. So for those reasons, it's probably worth having in a collection. But I'd be surprised that many people have spent much time listening to the record. Sorry to say, but anyway, there you have it. Fuse, check it out. Love to hear comments from anybody that has a higher opinion of the record than I do, or any other stories about Fuse. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching I Hate Rock Music.